recruiting enthusiasts. I'm Priyanka, and welcome to Tech Recruiting Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for gaining all the insider knowledge about the top recruiters in the tech industry. Today, we're joined by Derek Unnasch, who is a senior tech recruiter at Visa. With more than 15 years of experience, Derek has a lot of tips, hacks, and knowledge to share about the industry. Derek, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Glad for having me.
Yeah, so how are you doing today, Derek?
Doing really good. I'm speaking to you from Clearwater, Florida, and it's a nice sunny day here. It always is, actually, but an especially nice sunny day today.
Yeah, we are delighted to have you with us. And to start with, can you tell us a bit about yourself and Wheels Up as well? And can you also share with us how you got started in this industry and what drove your passion for nearly more than 15 years now?
Sure. As I mentioned, I live here in Clearwater, Florida, which is a suburb of Tampa, and I've been here for about 7 years. I've been doing, it's kind of interesting how I got into technical recruiting because it sort of happened by accident. It wasn't anything that I necessarily sought out to be part of. But through a number of things that I've done over the years, I have, part of my job description has been recruiting. So I was a district personal training supervisor for LA Fitness, for example, and I was recruiting for a number of different positions for all the state of Illinois. And then I was doing recruiting at mortgage companies and things like that. But it was never a full-time role, but it was something I was very, very acquainted with. And but fast forward to today, it was probably about 3 years ago. I was doing outplacement, which is basically helping people transition from who were being discharged from major companies. I was helping them transition to new employment, and there was an internal call for somebody who wanted, or for those of us who were interested in tech recruiting, who had some degree of recruiting experience. Well, my friend got recruited, and I heard how much more he was making than me. And I thought, well, maybe I should give this a try too. And I threw my hat in the ring, and sure enough, I got hired. And our client was one of the major, 4 or 5 tech companies out there. So we were getting rewarded pretty handsomely. But I have to say, to have my first agency experience with a company that big, that substantial, with that level of compensation, it was a little bit of a shock, but it was also a crash course in really getting down the finer points of, I knew, most of the elements of recruiting, but there were certain sourcing things that I didn't know until I worked there that really helped propel me and my skill set to what I would consider to be an elite level.
Yeah, I think amazing. And yeah, you've had a really good journey so far, and I'm eager to hear your story as well. And so to begin with, I want to ask you about the sourcing strategy, effective sourcing strategy. And so we know that recruiting takes up a lot of effort and expertise, and especially when it comes to the niche and the hard to fill positions. So I want to know how you would go about sourcing for these roles, and what methods have worked for you, and do you have any tips on how to create an effective recruitment strategy for these niche areas?
Sure. So I'm not sure necessarily that what I'm going to say is going to be confined in its efficacy to just tech. I think this is probably good for all recruiting, because I have recruited for a number of roles, and these roles I'm going to mentioned here, I think are going to be applicable across the board. But I will say right now that I've tried a number of different recruiting sourcing methods. And the one that everyone I think knows is the best is LinkedIn. And I have enough success with LinkedIn that I don't really need to walk outside of that. I mean, some people like to source resumes on Indeed and things like that. Well, if you go for people who are on Indeed, those are people who are looking for employment, but are probably actively looking for employment and getting hit on by a lot of different parties and a lot of different companies. What I like about LinkedIn is that I am approaching people who are not necessarily looking, but might very well be open to my pitch. And I'll get to my pitch in a second, but I like to compete against the fewest people possible. So I would prefer to go for someone who's not necessarily making it obvious that they're looking for work or what have you. So as far as what strategies I use, what my approach, and I always feel good when I see other recruiters' approaches being very verbose and long because I know I don't even have to consider them competition by and large. Because I take a minimalist approach. I think of myself. I don't have a horrible time span, but I think I'm like a lot of people where if we see a wall of words, our eyes glaze over and we don't want to read it. We're going to skim it and hopefully find something there of interest. And, if it's there, it's there. If it's not, then we delete and just ignore it. I want to make it appealing. I want just bite-sized chunks in there, everything impactful, right to the point. And I also don't want it to be something that looks like a form letter. When you see a form letter, 9 times out of 10. It sounds very formal. There was one that used to drive me crazy when I was over at this other company where they would say, this was from a couple of years back, but people are still using it. We hope you're doing well in these troubled times, blah, blah. I'm like, oh gosh, mine is very simple, very to the point, and it's probably a total of 4 sentences that I separate into 2 paragraphs, if you want to call them that. But someone can see their name, can see these 2 sentences here, which is basically like my 2-second pitch, and then my 2-sentence pitch. And then after that, right there, it's sort of a call to action, like, hey, if you're interested, let me know and I'll set up a call. Thanks, I hope to hear from you. And then I comma, and I mention their name again. So I mentioned their name twice. And in the body of their, when I'm pitching, would they be interested in leaving let's say Amazon? I'm just going to throw that out. Would you be interested in leaving Amazon for in my case, the private jet charter industry? Okay. So for a lot of people, there's my pitch right there. The private jet charter industry, not everyone's going to have like a fun sounding industry like that, but I do. And so I'm using that to my advantage. But anyway, mention your industry, especially if it's an interesting one. But anyway, I have a very, very minimalist pitch, and my response rate on those, if you were going to ask, is probably somewhere around between 40 and 50% response rate.
Yeah, I think the competition to attract this particular set of talent pool is extremely fierce, I would say. And I think recruiters they should like broaden their strategy as well. Like you can't just rely on the conventional approaches, and I think they should look beyond the typical profiles as well. And I think they have this whole unrealistic expectations, like both hiring managers. I think it's mainly set by the hiring managers, but then they all go in with these unrealistic expectations. And I think they should get rid of this whole perfect fit, because best hires are not always the perfect fit on paper. And
Mm-hmm.
I think having the clarity on what they're looking for and being very specific and accurate in the job description as well is really important. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about candidate attraction and engagement strategy, so attracting talent, I think, still remains a very like huge challenge because of the persistent gap, I would say, between the candidates' needs and the employer's approaches. So, like in your experience, like what mistakes have you seen companies most often making, and how can they improve and consistently maintain the entire strategy?
Um, a lot of companies try to diversify their approach too much and say we're going to do a drip campaign. We're going to do something heavily involving hashtags. Each one of these are okay, but I think you really need to concentrate your approach on a certain number of things. And as far as that's just from an outreach standpoint. So I'm not sure if I necessarily know the scope of your question, but I'm going to expand a little bit. The candidate experience is absolutely huge. The perception that there's multiple rounds, that like this is going to be some endless process, that's something that I see people, very have a lot of resistance to, and I get it. I mean, there are companies out there that absolutely put you through the ringer. The major company that I worked for, they had the intake. They had the initial phone screen with me. Then they had the call with the hiring manager. Then they had 4 technical rounds, each one being an hour. And then after that, there was team matching. And then this was taking up to 6 to 8 weeks. Speed is necessity if you want to catch people. You can't have a protracted process. And at my company, I'll mention the name of the company. I work for Wheels Up. We're a private jet charter company. We've worked diligently to streamline the process to where now it's just, we don't even consider my call a round. I mean, I'm just having an initial phone screen, which is only 15 minutes. There's no gotcha questions or anything. It's more of a taking them into the process. And I sell them on the company. I'll get more into that, but I sell them on the company. And I just articulate what the process is going to be. I do ask them some foundational questions, to find out, try to draw out, is somebody who we would want to have work here. And you have to be a bit of a profiler to do something like that. That's I don't. It comes with experience, I'll say that, but I can tell pretty quick by some of my questions whether or not someone is going to have a good disposition and is going to be pleasant to work with, or if they're the opposite of that. But I would say, keep that process brief, because after me, I was going to say, just complete my thought. After me, then they're speaking to a hire manager just for 30 minutes. Then there's like 3 technical rounds that take place in a day. They're about an hour long each. And then that's it. They're going to hear again from me with an offer letter if they do well.
Yeah, I think like you rightly said, like speed and quality is key. And I think maintaining the high candidate traction rate is like very important for building and maintaining the candidate pipeline as well. And I think one thing which everyone fails out is like keeping the candidate informed about each step of the process. The communication is just, not the way, whether you're like they're going to the next step or whether they're getting onboarded or when is the next interview. I think that communication, there's a gap, and I think in that process, they end up a lot of good talent as well. So I think they can make the whole process crisp and refined. Yeah.
That's true.
And so I want to talk about the whole hiring process. So we usually, it's defined to evaluate and assess the candidates. But I think what most people fail to realize is it's a two-way street. And there's a lot, which, your hiring process says about the company. And the common errors which I have seen companies make are like you're sending non-techies to assess techies, or you're not giving the right assessments, and you're setting excessively like difficult standards as well. And so I want to know like your take on how the hiring process can be made more efficient, and what are the common errors like they can avoid.
One thing that is, I don't want to say it's a constant struggle, but it's something that you constantly have to keep your eye on, is communication, full understanding of what the hiring manager wants out of a candidate and as it's articulated in the job description. I'll give you a good quick example of this. The other day I was sourcing for a candidate. I think it was a software design engineer, like an SDE2, for a hiring manager that I work very closely with. And he gave me the job description, and I went through it without even really talking to him, which was my first mistake. But I went through there and I highlighted all the things that he kind of identified it as qualifications for the job. So these were essentially necessities as I was reading it. Kubernetes, Delta Lake, C#, .NET, Azure, all these things. And there was a big list, and the amount of, and they all had to be like around Seattle. And so I was sourcing on LinkedIn Recruiter, which is, as I mentioned, that's my go-to resource. And I came up with about 27 people, just 27. And I kept taking out like one thing that, might be possibly, like not that big an element that might be redundant, like maybe object-oriented design might be the same thing as OON or something like that. So anyway, I finally got to the point where I go through this whole list, and I went to the hiring manager and go, I sent you all the people I got. I'd love to have more, but this is just a unique combination of elements. He said, oh, well, as long as they have C# and .NET, those are the main things. If they have the other stuff, that's cool. I'm like, oh, well, now I've got like 10,000 people. So anyway, that communication though, that is really, really important to get a full grasp of what those people want. Now, having said that, I'm not just going to throw everybody at the wall who has those two elements. I'm going to try to get as close as I can, but that it is so critical to understand what those people want.
Yeah, I think you've provided a very excellent insight on it, like, and not to have the vague job descriptions and just give the accurate what you actually require. And so when we talk about like the interview to hire ratio, so we know that it's not about like it's not about getting more candidates, it's about getting the right candidates. And obviously we can't find the right candidate if you're looking in the wrong place or asking the wrong questions. And I think what majority of recruiters are afraid of is like them asking the tough questions or ruffling up like feathers, and whether it's with the candidates or to the hiring managers. And I think there's a lot of factors which contribute in maintaining a high interview to higher ratio. So could you share with us like any learnings that have helped you in this process?
Um, yeah, one thing that has helped quite a bit um, for me, as the on the front line, because I'm the first person that passes them on to the hiring manager, is to go to that hiring manager and say, do you have a list of questions that are essentially litmus tests? Like if the person says yes to this, that's good. If they say yes to this, that's good. But if they say no to that, kick them out. They won't work. So I like to have specified questions directly from that hiring manager. Not necessarily just litmus tests, but ones that are going to give them special insight whereby as when they get my list of notes on my IPS, they can look at that and give a really informed decision as to whether or not they want to talk to that person, not just thinking, well, they look good enough, I'll give them a shot. I want them to make a really, really accurate judgment from there as to, a high percentage, the high percentage of accuracy, whether or not that person is worth their time to speak to. Because I'm trying to guard their time. That's one of the things that I'm tasked with, because they're not just hiring, they're also engaged in, tech projects below them. And I want to preserve that time for them.
Yeah, I think recruiters should be radically transparent, and I think understanding the needs is essential, like you said. And I think we need to I think most hiring managers are not as invested in the whole process, so I think we need to get them invested and have regular check-ins and discussions with them. And I think recruiters can measure all the efforts as well constantly when they have the communication and check-in, so that they can refine the process as well, and it'll be beneficial for the entire organization to improve the ratio. And so I want to talk about the relationship with the candidates. All the entire recruiting is based on relationships, and so when it comes to this, I think a lot of companies are struggling with mainly like they are making it a top priority, I would say. And so can you shed some light on like how crucial it is and how they can build and nurture really good relationship with the candidates?
Mm-hmm. I I naturally relate well with people, so that's something that I have. It's something that can be developed, but I think a lot of people have it or they don't. They have an engaging personality and a friendly style. I think it really helps if you really like people, and I genuinely do. So I have that gift, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I get not on a personal level with everyone, but I get personable with everyone. So when I contact them on LinkedIn, sometimes especially if it's a candidate that I really really like, that I want to keep engaged in that process, I'll even say to them, hey, good luck with that interview. I'm rooting for you. That really makes them feel very good and keeps them engaged. So I like to have, and I'm very, very quick to answer my LinkedIn. And if you're a recruiter that doesn't have LinkedIn recruiter on your phone, when people, for at night, I know some people are averse to working beyond 9 to 5. I get it. Some people have, families that they have very guarded time, but I want to be, somebody who gets back to people really quick. And it doesn't take much to reply to a LinkedIn, recruiter message. So I'm very quick. I'm very responsive, and the people that I'm working with understand that, and they never hesitate to contact me, for follow up. We have that type of relationship in general, and I totally encourage that. But one of the things I do early on that I should have brought up in the engagement process, because it really specifically pertains to that, but it also pertains to this point as well. And this is kind of my secret weapon. If I was going to say, this is the one thing in my arsenal that's the most important for my success as a recruiter, it's this. Um, Recruiting to some degree is, there's a sales aspect. Certainly, if you're the highest bidder and you're blowing everyone else away, I mean, it may not be so much sales because your money is doing the talking. And if that's someone's hot button, you might not be able to compete with that. But generally speaking, most opportunities are going to be lie in a particular plane with some, small deviations. There's not usually someone who's going to be, way high or way low. So given that, you have to distinguish yourself. And what I do is I use, a sales tactic. There's a thing called straight line sales. I learned this from the Wolf of Wall Street, actually. He sells to people on the product, sells to people on the company, and sells to people on himself. Now, what I do when I get people in there is, to sell them on the company, I tell them my own experience with the company. But also above and beyond that, I go, we're a private jet charter company right now. Even in the bad economic times that we're entering right now, our business is going up right now. It's not going down. It's practically outstripping our capacity to even deliver. That's how well it's doing. And, people of very high net worth are the ones who use our business, and they, in tough economic times, they're not scaling back their lifestyle. So I feel very, very comfortable about my job security here, and the trajectory of the company, things like that. So I'm selling them. I'm kind of using my own personal story, tying myself in with the company, really extolling, the virtues of the company and its outlook. And by the time I get done with all that, there's a few other things I say too. In reference to that. But by the time I get done with that, people are excited about the company. I also talk about the people there. People ask about the culture, and I can give, firsthand accounts about that. And I always like to relay a story. Whenever you can relay a story or an anecdote, then all of a sudden you have like social proof, and your story will take on 10 times more gravity than if you just say, the people here are really nice. Everyone here is really laid back and cool. You gotta offer a little bit more than that. So that, I'm pre-selling them at the beginning. So when it comes time for the offer letter, as long as they're okay with the salary, I got them because they want to work there. So that would be the one thing that I do I consider indispensable.
Yeah, I think I really love the part how you talked about personalization, because everyone's selling and how you are going to stand out of the crowd is really important. And candidate experience is definitely should be made priority. And it's amazing, how the power of communication can solve a lot of problems. But I think it's still one of the most overlooked aspect of the corporate culture. And so I think like as important it is to like maintain relations with candidates, it's also really important to maintain it with the hiring managers. And there is still a very wide communication gap, and to find the right candidate you need to understand like about the position, and to know what the hiring manager needs as well. And so like during my I think recent chat with Jashmi Raman, who's the director of software engineering at Capital One, she talks about the three T's. She believes in transparency, trust, and teamwork. And so she was giving me an inside look on the hiring manager's perspective. So now I want to hear your side, the recruiter's perspective on like where do you think things are going wrong, and what can be done to bridge this gap?
It's a very turbulent time right now in just about every company that I know to some degree or another, because, market conditions are changing right now and changing rapidly. Every one of like the big tech recruiting companies that I know of, including the one that I was just part of, had hiring freezes and then partial hiring freezes and things like that. Our company's doing really well, but I never know, if at some point, we could get affected by market conditions, and they could say, you know what, maybe put a pause for 2 weeks or something like that. So that's something that's always, really important. So I can't really, I know over at the other company, that type of stuff really wasn't communicated to us. We didn't have that type of communication, and a lot of our efforts, unfortunately, were in vain. We were providing candidates that were never going to go anywhere, that were going to be put on hold for weeks at a time, and no candidate wanted to work at that company enough to wait around. So communication is very big on that, and I actually knew that some of the hiring managers didn't want to communicate some of this, otherwise bad news to us when we were there. So communication is a big thing. And when, you're talking about the 3 T's, one of them was truthfulness. That's big, because we really kind of felt, a lot of us anyway, really felt that we were sort of deceived and we're sort of being kept on the hook as not to create a panic and maybe affect the company's stock price and things like that. But those 3 T's, those are dead on. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and hiring managers and recruiters, I think they need to have a relationship which goes beyond, just find me the right person. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it doesn't benefit either parties if an open and honest relationship isn't fostered as well. And yeah, I think before we, wrap up our conversation, I just wanted to ask, so your experience in the industry goes back to more than 1.5 decades. So like, can you tell us a bit about how the industry has changed over time, like when you started out and like, to today? And can you also share with us any lessons which has helped you gain new perspectives and mainly shape your approach in, recruiting?
Mm-hmm. Boy, I mean, the first time the first recruiting experience I had was in the mortgage industry back in, oh boy, I don't even want to say what year. It was somewhere back in the 2000s anyway, but it was a long time ago. And it was really before the internet took off to the extent that it did. We had some form of it, but it wasn't really something that we were using for recruiting. So, back then, there was a lot more networking involved. So I was talking to other people that I knew, trying to find, candidates for loan officers and for other, mortgage positions. And I would contact them directly over the good old telephone and, set up interviews and things like that. So that's something that has certainly gone by the wayside. But there's an important lesson there that I will say that is lost with a lot of recruiters today. And one of the things that I find to be very successful for me is to actually, if I have that phone number, for a candidate, is to call them if at all possible. Now, I don't expect them to pick up when they don't know who I am, but I will leave a voice message there, and that gives me an advantage over someone else who just sent an email. Because I'll send that email too, but now that they can associate a voice to that email, like I said, I have a leg up. And sadly, I think a lot of people today are scared to hop on the phone. They're just not used to it because we've been doing email so long. But I have no fear of that. I was fortunate enough to, when I first graduated college and jumped into the working world, I was literally in the phone book back when we had phone books, and I was calling up, accountants and realtors and attorneys and things like that, setting appointments, trying to, solicit them for business. So I think don't be afraid to take communication beyond just email. I would also say that if you have the opportunity in your screening calls as a recruiter, if you have the opportunity to do a Zoom call over just a phone call, do it. I think that's going to be a much greater connection. And when I was being recruited for Wheels Up, for example, I had a number of companies come after me. Now, Wheels Up didn't do this, but some other companies did, where they would set up a Zoom call. So I'm here on the screen, but they have a blank screen. Well, I don't think that's a way to create a connection, really. Okay. It didn't turn me off or make me mad or anything, but it certainly didn't, give me warm, fuzzy feelings about that company. Everyone at Wheels Up was on screen with me, and, we really connected very, very well. So those are some things that I would say are really important. Also, as far as sourcing is concerned, I'm just going to repeat it again. sell them on your company up front. Make it sound exciting. Make the industry sound, exciting. Hopefully it is. I couldn't go into personally. My advice would fall on deaf ears. If I was probably selling, or I was recruiting for like a corrugated box company or something like that. There's some industries I just don't know how you can make them sound exciting. But talk up your industry, talk up your country or your company. Relate yourself. Talk about some of your own positive experiences. Don't go on too long, but just create that impression. Get them. Make it an exciting opportunity and not just another opportunity. That would be my advice.
Amazing. I think you shared some really great lessons. And so yeah, that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for taking out the time to speak with me, Derek.
My
And
pleasure, Priyanka.
yeah, I really enjoyed the insights you've shared with us today, and the experience of me getting to know you and learning from your experience. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.